Hello and welcome to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. Today we have Ed Rottman. Ed is the CEO at Chroma Energy Group. Chroma Energy Group is out of Tennessee. I was just looking up in my emails and I saw that we were actually copied on an email in our history. So our paths sort of maybe cross. So what's up, Ed? How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, Sean. I'm honored and excited to be on here. Looking forward to discussing renewable energy and anything else you want to talk about.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's think of all kinds of crazy things to talk about. Like that concert I went to with my daughter this week. That would be fun. I saw Mick Jagger, 80-year-old, up on stage. It was pretty awesome.
Okay, all right. So she has different tastes than my daughter. My daughter is all about one individual currently, and that is Taylor Swift.
Oh,
So
okay.
not quite the same as the Rolling Stones. I'm jealous.
I'd kind of like to see Taylor Swift just to see what it's all about and to see the crowd. And I think it would be interesting. I do have a 9-year-old, but she's not a Swiftie. So,
Oh, okay. So my daughter Natalie is 10 and she is.
uh-huh.
So okay, gotcha.
Uh-huh.
So your daughter seems like
Yeah.
one of the rare ones these days.
Well, maybe in another year she'll change her mind. So let's get on to the solar and the solar industry and all that and talk a little bit about you. So I was just looking up on your LinkedIn profile, and besides being the CEO at Chroma Energy Group, which is into the solar industry and all that, it looks like you worked for Stowers Machinery. Maybe
Mhm.
that had something to do with Caterpillar. And then Missile Defense Agency. I believe that was the United States of America.
Yes, correct.
And then Booz Allen Hamilton, oftentimes called Booz Allen. So you're like a consulting group and NCR. So you've done a lot of really neat and interesting stuff. And you're in Tennessee. And I thought maybe some of the other things that we could talk about is things that are going on in Tennessee. One of the things that I like to talk about sometimes is getting people together from different political persuasions, accomplishing the same thing, reaching across the aisle and all that kind of stuff. And I saw that you were on, I think it was a podcast or an interview with a Tennessee Senator Tim something, I guess.
Yeah, so Tennessee Congressman Tim
Congressman.
Burchard.
Tim.
Yes.
Okay. Tim Burcham. Okay. And I enjoyed listening to that. And he was on something called the Conservative Climate Caucus. So I
Mhm.
thought that was pretty neat. And I just think it's really neat that we get all the different people together. And I think people would be sometimes surprised to know how many conservatives are in the solar industry working hard. And I like to bring people together instead of trying to alienate people from being on one side or the other. So I think that's pretty neat. And so another thing that you hear in the news a lot too is with the Inflation Reduction Act, that
Mhm.
most of that money is going to red states. And I believe Tennessee might be one of those states. I think there's manufacturing going on in Tennessee. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, there's a lot of momentum in the Southeast now, and a lot of those states are probably considered red states. And yeah, there's a lot of money flowing into the Southeast for renewable energy. They've started to embrace it for a couple different reasons. One is for economic development. A lot of the companies that are moving to the Southeast, it's basically a requirement for them to move there, is they want some portion of their energy portfolio to come from carbon free electricity. And so not only does it have sustainability benefits, but individuals in the Southeast and private enterprises are starting to basically demand it. And so the utility companies down here, like TVA, Duke Energy, Southern companies, are really realizing that it's a prerequisite and it has a lot of economic development benefits as well. So, yeah, there's been a lot of momentum. For a while, Southeast was probably considered maybe a little bit behind the West Coast and the Northeast. And it still is in regards to total megawatts installed, but it is growing rapidly and it's a fun place to work. And so that's mainly where we operate in the Southeast. And it's been very good lately.
And I know that Al Gore's from Tennessee. Do you see him around? Do you see him at the grocery store and stuff, picking up butter or whatever?
I haven't crossed paths with him yet. I believe he is a Middle Tennessee resident, and I did live in Nashville. I went to school in Nashville for a couple years and met my wife in Nashville, but I live in Knoxville currently, and so I don't see him very often. So no.
Yeah, and I think that's where we had the NABCEP conference one year was in Knoxville. And then I also went to the Tennessee conference in Knoxville too. So I've been doing, I think it's been about 3 or 4 different NEC talks at the annual Tennessee conference, and lots of neat people that I meet there at the Tennessee conference. And I hear them talking about something that I remember studying in, I think even in high school, the TVA. And so you
Mhm.
probably know more about the Tennessee Valley Authority than I do.
Exactly. Yeah.
And was that one of those New Deal things? Is that like Roosevelt and all that stuff?
Yeah, it was created right around that time frame, and they are a tremendous influence, a very well-run power utility. And yeah, they've been a big driver for renewable energy over the last 4 to 5 years. They passed kind of recent announcement in the Valley, they call it, that's kind of their area of operation, and it is a 5% flexibility, they call it, which they now also back up a little bit. So, Tennessee is a wonderful state, and it has been growing a lot of companies and people moving there. And so, there has begun to be a little bit of a grid capacity issue as a lot of unexpected growth. It's skyrocketed over the last few years. And so, they need to catch up. And so, this 5% flexibility allows the local LPCs, local power companies, to actually generate their own power if it is clean and if it comes from a renewable energy source. And so that has also kind of opened up the floodgates a little bit for a lot of investment in solar energy. But yeah, TVA is at the very strong influencer of what happens in this area. And yeah, they've done a really good job investing in renewable energy over the last 5 years.
Great. Yeah, I know I've heard some people recently complaining about TVA for solar, but you know, who likes their utility really? Like, do you hear people anywhere going like, I have the best utility. I think they give me great rates. Like, even people in Dubai that are paying 2 cents a kilowatt hour, pretty much they're giving them free electricity if they're born there, and they think it's too expensive.
Uh, I have a lot of respect. I think you're right about the sentiment. I mean, literally, anytime, it doesn't matter if there's a tornado that just went through, if anybody loses their electricity for a moment, they're quick to blame utility company. And it's really the only industry where you have to supply the exact right amount of electricity, and it's real time and everybody needs it, perfectly all the time. And so I think to manage those transmission networks and all the different types of generation that Tennessee Valley is over. And honestly, I think they do a really good job of doing that. So, yeah, but I think they catch a little bit of flack here and there, but I have a lot of respect for what they do.
Yeah, and also just in general, utilities are a natural monopoly. Like, what are you going to do? Send 3 sets of wires down every street? And, it's got its drawbacks of just, having that problem. It's a little bit communist.
Yeah, people do say that it's not that natural free market competition that a lot of other businesses face. And so I understand that sentiment, but TVA does a great job of producing affordable, reliable, and sustainable electricity in the valley. So yeah, when you get in there, it's one of those things, it's easy to comment and I guess to complain on social media networks or stuff like that. But we just had a really strong storm system actually go through the Southeast 2 days ago and knocked out a ton of high voltage lines. And really, just due to TVA's response and the redundancy, they were able to essentially get electricity through other lines and through the transmission network. And there really wasn't even a blip in the electricity. And the storm knocked down a lot of massive high voltage lines. And so, another example of it just kind of being seamless and them doing a really good job from my perspective. But you're always going to catch a little bit of flack. That's kind of the way things operate today.
Maybe they could give some lessons to some other states on how to make that happen. Uh,
Yeah, they could.
and I won't mention that big state that's kind of south and in the middle of the country. I won't mention it at all.
Oh, okay. I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, y'all. Oh, yeah. And speaking of that, I'm headed to RE Plus in Texas very soon, but this is actually recorded. So I've already been there by the time that this gets released. So, anyway, let's talk a little bit about your company, Chroma Energy Group. You're the CEO, it's an EPC. What kind of jobs does your company do? Like, is it, are you doing terawatts? I'm just kidding.
So yeah,
That's how much
no.
solar is in the world as of 2 years ago. So
Exactly. No, we have a niche. And so, for people who are not as familiar with solar or renewable energy, so an EPC stands for engineering. So, we design our systems. If you have 20, 30, 50 acres and want to know exactly how many megawatts you can produce and how you're going to interconnect, we design that. And the P is for, procurement. And so, we source all the materials, which is not as easy as people think it is. So there are some domestic content requirements out there, and there are a lot of modules that come from different places, and you really have to be able to source tier one products and know what you're getting. And then the C is for construction. And yeah, I have a passion for projects. I love job sites. And so we are a licensed electrical general contractor, and we are actually the ones that go out there, execute. We do the civil, we drive the piles, we put up the mechanical racking, and then we do all the electrical and actually just tie it into the grid and then turn it on. And so we do a little bit of kind of turnkey installation, we call it, from soup to nuts. And so, yeah, and it's just started the company a little bit over a year ago. And we focus on distributed generation as of now. So, distributed generation is going to be anything from like 2 megawatts to 20 megawatts. That is our niche, and we've seen a lot of growth in that. And so that is in the utility sector predominantly. And then we also have made a big push into the private sector, and we call that the commercial and industrial. And so utility companies and the federal government have been asked to be in, doing renewable energy for a long time. But where I've started to become passionate and very interested in is how private sector companies are starting to use it. And whenever you deal in the private sector, it absolutely has to pencil. They have their shareholders, they have their returns. And so it's been this really neat intersection to see the costs come down of the different products and really see these systems that people were maybe a little skeptical of for a long time, and then really get in there and see how they provide economic benefit, not just sustainability goals and, some resiliency in some cases, but they are actually very good investments for these companies. And I've really enjoyed getting into that side of the business as well. So yeah, so that's what we do. No terawatts, no gigawatts yet. We're starting with that niche of 3 to 20 megawatts.
great, great. Well, that's pretty good that you're already working your way up there, considering you're such a new company. And thank you so much, too, for explaining what EPC is, engineering, procurement, and construction. And then you said commercial and industrial. And a lot of people say C&I. And I always have to, say, hold on, let's tell people what C&I means. So that's commercial and industrial. And then one other thing that you mentioned, too, that you didn't give the DG abbreviation for was distributed generation. And it's kind of funny. I was thinking too that I think you said 2 to 20 megawatts. And so that's pretty big, like we're talking acres and acres of PV. And I should say pretty big for a lot of people, but some people think it's small. Like my next interview is going to be with a guy named Paul Subzak, and he works on huge systems, and he would probably think that that's small. We'll find out. Listen to the next podcast, everybody, and we'll see what he thinks is.
Yeah, there's a big range of size. You keep hearing different things. So I was just at the American Clean Power Conference earlier this week. We were talking about travel earlier. So I just got back from Minneapolis, and I was meeting with someone who was talking about a 650 megawatt installation. It seemed like just a little while ago when you heard 150, 200, those were the biggest. And now 650 in one site to me is crazy. And that does not happen as often in the Southeast where I work due to topography and landscape constraints. Yeah, you don't see them that big here, but it's amazing. It really is.
Yeah, you know what I was thinking too is as I was flying from San Francisco to Phoenix earlier this week and looking out the window on the left side of the airplane, I think I saw more solar out of my window than there was installed in the whole world probably 15 years ago, maybe 15 to 20, something like that. But if you go back to the year 2000, the whole world had about 1 gigawatt installed. And now, of course, we have, probably like 1,500 gigawatts. So it's incredible to see that this growth. And then one thing that I was thinking to myself is like, if this growth keeps up, we're going to be successful. Then we could possibly be victims of our own success. And then all the people working in the solar industry is like, well, we've got enough energy for everybody. What are we going to do next? So that's a nice problem to have.
Yeah, I may go on the other side of that. That would be a fantastic accomplishment, but like I really feel like, I mean, everything they say, we're going to need 50% more capacity, just overall capacity on the grid by 2035, and then double by 250. I think everything that we are really looking at and going to do as a country is going to be contingent on increasing the clean energy capacity. And when you look at all the innovation that's taking place in the US and around the world with AI, with EVs, and then in the United States, onshoring our manufacturing, that all those things are going to require a huge amount of electricity, and they're all going to be run on clean energy. I think we have done some tremendous good things when it comes to increasing the amount of clean energy that we have. And I do agree with you, it's changed dramatically over the last 10 years. When you look at really the direction that the world is going, it's only going to continue to go up. So, but yeah, but it's positive. I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that that's true or even that I believe that. But if you think about it, like 1,000-fold increase, 3 orders of magnitude, if we grew by another 1,000, like what it took us just about 20 years to grow by 1,000-fold, if we did that again, that would be way more than all the energy in the world. I mean, that would be a huge amount. But yeah, it's just kind of dreaming.
Yeah, it's good to see. And it's really interesting, I think, to look back at the last 10 years and what's happened. And, we talked a little bit about politics and, honestly, living in the Southeast in a red area, and, I am conservative by nature. I don't even think clean energy is really an emotional, political, partisan issue anymore. It's being driven by the private sector, it's being driven by the market and free enterprises. And, it's just really that's the way we're going. And as we mentioned, I worked for Stowers Machinery, a Caterpillar dealer, and have a lot of experience with internal combustion engines, the mining sector, oil and gas. And I have a great,
Probably lots of generators.
yeah, exactly, lots of diesel generators. I have a lot of respect for those industries, and they're always going to be part of it. And I do think a portfolio type of approach is the best way to do it. But to be honest, as the technology improves, as storage improves, you can mitigate the intermittency of renewable energy. It's going to become a bigger and bigger part. And that's really exciting. I mean, it's great stuff.
Yeah, great. And I just really like that too, where you said like being a conservative by nature. If you think about it, conserving energy, I mean, the root word that you have there, also not being so dependent on foreign oil and all that kind of stuff, not sending fighter jets to places where there's no democracy so we can burn fuel when we have lots of sunshine. And you know what? I had a rental car. They upgraded me yesterday to a convertible red Mustang. I mean, it looked really nice. And it was a brand new car. And compared to my 9-year-old Tesla Model S, it was not very fun to drive. It was just like the acceleration with my electric vehicle is a lot faster, a lot smoother. It was just like more solid by nature. The electric car was just a lot more fun to drive. Except, I don't know, it is nice having a convertible. I drove down the coast highway. Can't complain too much.
Can't complain. Yeah, right. If the weather is good, which it usually is, that's not a bad thing either. So, well, my kids will be jealous. They ask me every day, it seems like we drive by a Tesla dealership. When are you going to get an EV? When are you going to get an EV? To them, I remember growing up, it was like, I had a poster of, like a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, in my room, and that was what I wanted. Now it's funny, kids growing up, they're like, the Tesla is the coolest car that they can get. And I think that's neat to an extent. I really do.
Yeah, and they don't even have a convertible, What's up with that?
I know. They've got the Cybertruck now, so that's gives them some cool elements of that.
Yeah, maybe we cut the top off of one. That'd be kind of fun. Right in the back while it's on autopilot.
Yeah, my son is a diehard Batman fan. He calls it the Batmobile, and
Yeah,
I
I
can
can
see
see
that.
that.
I mean, it kind
Yeah.
of it looks like it.
Great, great. Another thing that I've been reading about that's happening, I'm not sure if it's in Tennessee, but there's been some campaigns like on Facebook and stuff like that, where people are against solar because they're saying that it takes up agricultural land. Have you seen any of that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That is an interesting topic right now. And it's in the Southeast, it's in Tennessee, going on in Virginia, and it's fascinating. It really is. So, they just finished a TASA report in the state of Tennessee, which really chose to look at land use, and they focus on agriculture use as well. And really, the study has demonstrated that if the full plan of TVA to implement solar goes through, it would be under 1% of the total land, and I believe under 3% of the total agriculture land that's out there. And, a lot of people who, to me, it's always like, as we talked about, sometimes it's easy to, throw stones. But if you actually, go put your boots on and go talk to people, it's really interesting what you see, because farming is hard, and it is. And I admire the people that do it. We need it as a country and necessary. And yes, it's good to know where you get it from. And, I think domestic farming is huge. And, a lot of the farmers and all of the ones that I've talked to would love to have a solar installation on their farm to help these farms financially. I mean, it's a tough business. And if you can lease part of it to a developer and use that, and the money that comes from these leases really, really actually help these farms thrive and continue to grow. And so it's one of those things, you can say something and it sounds good, but when you actually go out there and talk to people, sometimes things get a little bit different and you get different answers.
Yeah, I've heard that it's not even the farmers that are against it. Like they want it because it's like, well, I want to be able to make my choice. I want to have my freedom. And if I want to do solar, I should be able to have the freedom to do solar. Or if I want to do farming, I could do farming. But the neatest thing is doing both at once. We have agrivoltaics. And a lot of people already know what that is. You're mixing agriculture with photovoltaics. And that's not really a new thing. One of the things I've seen too, that's kind of funny, is for some of these utility scale solar farms, the lawnmowers have fur, they make wool, they're sheep. And they actually have a sheep price, like a price per watt for sheep, which is kind of funny. And then your energy comes with lamb chops, I guess.
Yeah, it's that ultimate win-win. Reduces the maintenance. You got some sheep grazing around, and I know they're trying out different animals currently as well. It is a big thing. Sheep tend, that was the natural first one to go with, but I believe they're looking at doing it with other type of, agricultural animals as well. So it'll be interesting to see what comes from it.
Yeah, I think they say that just in historically too, sheep have been sort of analogous with, just acting like sheep. Like, oh, those people act like sheep, like they just follow whatever. So they're not too aggressive. They're not like these crazy wild goats, or I shouldn't say wild, but just goats that like to jump on things and chew things. And, nothing against goats. I love goats too. But the sheep are just more sheepish, and you get sweaters out of there. So the sheep can help out the vegetarians too, keep them warm.
Yeah, so it's a lot of interesting things going on out there right now. And that is agrivoltaics is one of them. It's neat.
Yeah, and some of the other things too is they're making fencing, so you can have bifacial PV and put it vertical. So if you have it going east-west, in the east as the sun's rising or the west as the sun's setting, you get more energy in the morning and the afternoon. And if you take the bifacial PV and you add it up, it almost makes about the same amount of energy as monofacial PV that's facing south, because you have it on
Really?
both sides. Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Yeah, most of the systems that we install now have the bifacial modules on them. And, we typically will use one of those tracking systems specifically for the utility system ones that kind of follow the sun and help with the production rates. But yeah, I did not know that about the production of them.
We interrupt you for a very important announcement. Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast has been brought to you by Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. That's right, Sean White is sponsoring his own podcast, and he wants to remind you to go check out some of his classes. You can go to SolarSean, that's solar, SEAN.com, and then click on the links to check out his classes. You can check out his heat spring classes, and you can also hire him to teach classes for you, like at your company, something like that. Now back to the show. So the big benefit that you have with bifacial PV that's facing, say, east and west, is your
Mhm.
south-facing PV is peaking out at noon. And so you probably know about the duck curve, and we have so much
Mhm.
energy at noon and not enough in the evening, and maybe not enough in the morning, depending on where you are. And if you have a lot of south-facing PV in town, and then you get the east and west facing bifacial PV, you're kind of
Mhm.
compensating for it and kind of smoothing out what you make. You're going to make less at noon, more in the morning, more in the afternoon. So it
Okay.
kind of fits with what the grid needs. So it's kind of a neat thing. And then I had somebody else on the podcast, Joe McCabe, not too long ago, and he's been studying solar since the 90s, I think it is, maybe even
Mhm.
the 80s. And I think he was saying that he figured out that even if you went north and south, you still make about the same amount of energy, and it depends on where you are and how close you are to the equator and what the weather patterns are and all that kind of stuff. But if you look at just like a plain old east-facing PV module or a plain old west-facing PV module that's not bifacial, it's going to make
Mhm.
about 50% of what south-facing tilted at 30 degrees is going to make.
Mhm.
So you add up 50% plus 50%, and I got to get a calculator for that one.
Yeah, I know it's tricky.
So it's pretty much about equal. Yeah, pretty neat. But then that's neat that you're doing trackers. And so do you have a system size that you say that this is where we start using a tracker, but below a certain size, you don't use a tracker?
Yeah, so that is typically how it works out. 3 megawatts and up, due to the scaling, it starts to make
Mm.
sense for a tracking system. 3 megawatts and down, we will typically not go. And so, yeah, we use fixed for that. So, yeah.
Yeah, when it's smaller, you just have to, it's like maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So it's nice to mass produce your maintenance and your tracker bearing maintenance. You got moving parts there. So.
Exactly. Yep, very true.
But that is a huge thing. Like most solar in the world and in the United States, I think in the United States, it's somewhere around 2/3 of the solar is utility scale. And most utility scale is using single axis trackers. And so it goes morning east, noon flat, afternoon to the west. And so that's a good percentage of the industry. A lot of people just think of solar being on their house and they're like, oh, solar is a rooftop thing and all that kind of stuff, because that's what they see and that's who's calling them up and knocking on their door. And so we have a lot of this bifacial PV on trackers, not just in the United States, but all over the place. And it's amazing how inexpensive the bifacial PV's been, the monofacial PV's been. But I did notice recently that I think they're going to remove that rule where there's no tariffs on bifacial PV. Do you know about that?
Yeah, that was kind of the big discussion up at ACP, American Clean Power, this last week. We heard the exact same thing. I believe the module manufacturers are saying that same thing now. With the government, sometimes you don't know what's going to happen, and that can change in the 11th hour. But yes, the tariff exemption that they received could be going away, and that could have an impact on the price of those. So that's what we were hearing from the module manufacturers.
Yeah, I always thought it was kind of interesting. It was just like over the last 5 years, or maybe even more than that, there's been back and forth on the exemption of tariffs for bifacial modules. And so there's tariffs on PV modules made in other countries because there's unfair labor practices and things like that. Maybe we're having a solar trade war, which is a lot better than a war where they use weapons. And but I just thought it was like, well, why the exemption for bifacial? Like maybe it should be an exemption for monofacial, or maybe no exemption or exemption, or it just seemed kind of silly. And then when they go back and forth, it messes with the investment, because how do you decide to invest in something if you don't know how much it's going to cost and all that? So
And there's a tremendous amount of investment going on right now with just the domestic production of modules. And I don't know if that's going to, expedite, try to increase it as people try to get around some of these tariffs. But yeah, it will have an impact on the price and what people do to procure those. So I agree. It's something worth following.
yeah, great, great. And so another thing too, when you mentioned distributed generation, you said 2 to 20 megawatts. If you go back 15 years and somebody called 20 megawatts distributed generation, they'd be like, what? And so it just goes to show you how much bigger things are getting. I mean, you go to, I don't know, I think it was up until about 15 years ago, something like that. The biggest project in the whole United States was 14 megawatts out at Nellis Air Force Base. And now there's people that are just like, I don't do anything that small. Like that's too small for me. So
I know.
in distributed generation, pretty much what it means is you make it in a distributed way, or you install it in a distributed way where you distribute it in all different places on the grid. So instead of having like one giant central power plant that's a gigawatt, like a nuclear power plant or something like that, you have lots of smaller systems. And so distributed generation could be one microinverter on your roof, and it could be a lot bigger than that. It could be what some people would consider a giant project, but just not the biggest one.
And there's so much money tied in the transmission of those centralized generation points as well. And so when you can strategically put them around different places, it saves a lot of money from the infrastructure, which, a lot of people believe that's going to be one of the main issues that we have going forward as we need to increase our grid capacity, is how much money that goes into the infrastructure for that as well. So I'm a big believer in distributed generation, whether that is at a house level or a company level or just these little pockets of solar installations. I think it's a very good thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of the places where it was easy to put solar on the grid, like to put, hundreds of megawatts, all those spots are taken up and reserved. And then there's the smaller places on the grid where you can still put some, tens of megawatts. And so that sounds like that's what you're working on, is filling those places up.
Yeah. And from a distributed generation perspective, those are the conversations we have with businesses as well. I think a lot of heavy industrial customers know that the grid is going to continue to get strained as we grow. And I think they're wanting to take responsibility for at least a percentage of their generation. And they like the idea of having backup power. Some of their core functions will still work if there is an extended blackout. And in those situations, it makes sense as well. And I think that is going to be one of the answers of how we solve this grid capacity issue going forward. I don't believe that investing, the $20 billion in a plant and another $10 billion in a transmission system is what's going to get us there. I think people and companies are going to start doing more distributed generation, and solar is what works best in those scenarios.
Yeah, it makes financial sense. And then as we get more and more solar, of course, we're seeing energy storage. So are you seeing a lot of energy storage in Tennessee? I know that, I'm out in California right now, and I've done a lot of classes in places where there's lots of solar, and that's where they need more energy storage, where there's more solar. So as the industry matures, you see more storage. And so how about out where you are? Is the energy storage getting huge, or do you see it in the future?
That's interesting. That's the hot topic. I think, people understand solar and the benefits are pretty black and white. Storage, that's where a lot of the innovation has occurred and is going to continue to occur over the next decade. And so the cost of storage, is coming down, but it's still expensive. But we are starting to see some utility scale storage projects that are taking place at a TVA or local power company level. And then from a commercial sector, we're seeing a lot of companies look at demand / peak shaving applications of storage. One of the things that I think is really interesting, because we're always looking at it from an economic perspective. And that is, when you install solar, you can reduce your overall monthly usage. But a lot of C&I customers, they also get charged quite a bit for their demand / peak usage charge. And typically that happens in the morning when they come into these big factories and they fire everything up and a bunch of motors click on, and that's when it kind of spikes. That's not when solar is at its peak. And so we optimize these systems by pairing up with storage, and through these new energy management systems, they can tell when you go above a certain threshold, and that's when they start to discharge their batteries. So we're seeing it from a distributed perspective, where companies are realizing with storage, they can really bring down those peak demand charges, and there's a huge ROI attached to that. And yes, we're starting to see it from a utility perspective as well, where people are doing large storage projects. And as the technology changes, I think everyone's looking for that next generation of storage. We're still using lithium ion, and there's a lot of information out there about what's coming next on that curve. And I'm fascinated to learn that.
Yeah, and I've done some back of the napkin calculations too. And just from where I live, if I drew a 5 mile circle, I'm sure that there's like way more, like maybe 10 times more, 20 times more energy storage that's in electric vehicles. They're just sitting there, perhaps plugged in, and that don't really cycle their batteries up and down that much compared to like the biggest energy storage system in the world. So that would be in Moss Landing, which is not too far from me. And I believe they're at 3 GWh right now. And so you mentioned energy management systems, and we call that EMS in the National Electrical Code. And the energy management systems, I think they're in their almost infant stage compared to what we're going to see. It's kind of amazing too with all this AI stuff. We had a climate week in San Francisco, and then we had NorCal Solar, which I'm the president of. We had our 50th birthday party recently.
Oh, awesome. That's cool.
Yeah, and it was kind of amazing that a lot of them came from, through Climate Week, and we had all these interesting speakers, and a lot of them were doing AI stuff with software and all these new ideas. It's pretty amazing to just see like what's happening in Silicon Valley. And like when I drive to the airport now, it's just like every billboard is about AI. And there's just a lot of people going into these jobs and software as a service and figuring out how to incorporate AI into other things. In fact, one guy showed up, it was Climate Week, so we weren't saying just for solar. One guy showed up and he had a cheese company, and somehow they used AI to design this like cheese, and it won a cheese award. And I had a taste of the brie, and it just tasted like good brie. I would have never known that it was vegan. And then I heard he was on Late Night with David Letterman.
Hmm.
It wasn't the guy, but he was tasting this cheese. And it was pretty funny. Like it was just the guy was at our event, and then there he is talking to Stephen Colbert. Not, did I say David Letterman? Stephen Colbert.
Yeah. Yeah, okay,
Stephen Colbert
gotcha.
took it over for Letterman. Sorry about that. Kind of dates me now, huh?
I grew up with Letterman. I get it. I grew up during that time.
Yeah. So, anyways, I thought that was kind of weird, like taste. Like, how do you make taste happen with AI? But they're doing all kinds of things with this AI, and it's pretty amazing. And so, when you can figure out how to charge the batteries, make the power go this way and that
Mhm.
way, and the cars are already self-driving. Like, I'm driving by cars that there's no driver in that car. And I was just in Phoenix. They have those Waymo driverless cars over there too. There's a lot of tech stuff going on over there. It's pretty crazy, all the stuff that's happening and how fast it's happening. But with the energy management systems, the EMS, knowing when to send the power to the batteries, to the car, from the car, to the air conditioner, you can really reduce what you were saying, demand charges. And so that's, when you're peaking out, when you have everything turned on all at once, you can coordinate that and maybe turn on the air conditioner before people fill up the building, and then turn it off while they first enter the building and motors are turning on, and rotate different things. So just so everything's not on all at once.
It's crazy in how AI, moves forward. I think that renewable energy and AI are very much linked at the hip going forward. I mean, AI is going to require a huge amount of electricity, as we talked about earlier, to get where it needs to be, computing, cloud storage, all that type of stuff. And then, renewable energy needs AI, just like you're saying, for the whole
Mhm.
smart grid concept is going to be dramatically improved by the usage of AI. And so those two industries, I really believe, are linked at the hip, and I think they're going to go forward together.
Yeah, AI takes a lot of energy to run those super fancy chips, but then it can save us a lot of energy. So it would be interesting to find out like what's the balance going to be? And we won't know until the future, but it's like how much energy does it save versus how much energy does it cost?
Sure, there'll be some different subjective maybe opinions on that. I'm sure there'll be lots of different ways to calculate that, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and then you have like AI with robots. Maybe they'll make the factories work more efficient and less expensive and come up with more efficient solar cells, and it could hit it on that side too.
Yeah, and I know we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, it's pretty neat times. So let's see. So is there any other things that you wanted to talk about or cover or get out there?
It's a amazing industry to work in, and it's been a tremendous learning curve over the last year. But the two major issues that I think will impact how renewable energy does in the future, the first one is, workforce development and how people and having trained individuals that can actually go out there and execute on this broad topic called the energy transition is going to be crucial. And I think that is something that really led me down the career path that I'm in right now, which is actually, being an EPC and being out there on a job site and working with people who are actually making this transition happen is great. But I do think as we go forward, that is going to be a big issue is, are we able to get the people who know how to do this? So enjoy employing and training and working with these people that make it happen. And the other is just going to be the infrastructure investments that are required. It is going to be a lot of people bringing this up together. And we do have some work that needs to take place in order to make it happen. And, it's a fun industry to work in. Really enjoy it. The Southeast has come a long way, and it's riding a wave that I think is going to continue with investing in renewable energy. So, yeah, that's it. And I appreciate you having me. This has been really enjoyable, and it was really good to talk with you.
Yeah, and so I'll probably see you at the Tennessee conference, and I have on my calendar that looks like that's going to be November 20th and 21st, and I'm going to be at all the big conferences, usually doing National Electrical Code workshops, talking about building codes and fire codes too. And where do people find you, Ed?
Oh, geez. So at a job site, always a place I like to spend as much time as I can in my office, working on all the new initiatives that we're doing at Chroma. And then at my house with my wife and my 3 kids, and as much as possible. When I travel, I do like to go to the conferences as well. We really try to work within call it a 5 or 6 hour kind of radius. And so if I do have to travel for work, for a project, it's typically not that far. But yeah, that's kind of my life these days, and it's exciting and I love it.
So a 5-hour radius, and that's in your private jet, is that right?
Yeah, now maybe one day, maybe the electric PJ.
The electric private jet, yeah.
Yeah. No, just cruising around in the car.
Yeah, Mach 2, we're working on that. Yeah. And so where do we find Chroma Energy Group?
Chroma is based in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Great. And how about a website?
Yeah, so it is www.chromaaenergygroup.com. And come check us out. We got, a little bit of information about who we are, the projects we've done, and kind of our goals. And so check us out. And any questions on storage or solar, give me a shout.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Ed Rottman, CEO at Chroma Energy Group. And thanks for listening to Sean White's Solar and Energy Storage Podcast. To find more, go to SolarSean, that's SolarSean.com, and get yourself NABCEP certified.